3 days, they took out 11 withdrawals. Do you want to know the amount?
I'm too scared to ask.
$249,000.
Jesus.
It took Edward and Joan 60 years to save their retirement nest egg, but it took just days for hackers to take the lot. And what's worse, they say their bank didn't act.
It took Edward and Joan 60 years to save $249,000, and it took scammers exactly 3 days to steal every single cent while their bank watched 11 massive withdrawals drain the account and did absolutely nothing to stop it. This is the story of how a single text message destroyed 6 decades of careful saving, and if you think this could never happen to you, or someone you love, you need to hear what comes next. Because the tactics used here are being deployed right now against thousands of families across the world. And the only defense is knowing exactly how these predators operate. So if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because we investigate these cases so you don't become the next victim.
He said before we were married that he'd look after the money, and I was very agreeable at the time. I said, fine.
So that's the secret to a good marriage, yeah?
Yes.
Edward was 86 years old, and Joan was 82, and they had been married for decades, building their life together through steady work, consistent saving, and careful decisions. And when Joan described their arrangement, she put it simply, "He said before we were married that he would look after the money, and I was very agreeable at the time." And that trust, that quiet partnership, had worked for more than half a century. But what this case reveals is something deeply uncomfortable about modern financial crime. Because the most devastating scams don't come from strangers demanding money at gunpoint. They come from voices that sound helpful, from screens that look official, from systems we've been taught to trust. And when the victim is elderly, when they've spent a lifetime believing that following instructions and being responsible will keep them safe. The betrayal cuts even deeper, because the very qualities that helped them build their savings, patience, compliance, trust and authority, become the exact vulnerabilities that scammers exploit.
15-year-old, and it's all pretty easy, but the only problem is you can get into trouble.
Edward and Joan lived in Adelaide, Australia, and their retirement savings were not extra money. Sitting around for speculation, this was the foundation of their daily existence, paying for utilities, groceries, medical costs, and the small comforts that make aging dignified, and they were not technophobes. Disconnected from modern banking, both used computers regularly. Edward handled online accounts confidently, and he had once said, "I'm not 15 years old, and it's all pretty easy," because the platforms were familiar and had worked without incident for years. And this is critical to understand.
It said that you've successfully logged into 190.2.3, which is an IP address, and you've sent $10 to Louise Parsons in Nigeria.
Because when we hear about elder fraud, we sometimes imagine confused people who don't know how to use technology, but Edward knew exactly how to navigate his accounts. He just didn't know that the entire system could be weaponized against him by someone patient enough to build his trust. The attack began quietly, with a text message appearing on Edward's phone claiming that a small payment of $10 had been sent from his account to someone named Louise Parsons in Nigeria, and the message referenced an unfamiliar IP address, and it looked exactly like the legitimate security alerts Edward had seen before from real services.
First day, they took out 3 entries that totaled 20,000, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 the first day. The second day, they did the 20,000, 10,000, and 20,000, plus 50,000 plus 49,900. So that was 150,000, less $100. And then on the next day, the Saturday, they took out 20,000, 10,000, 20,000, another 50, which totaled 11 entries.
And this is the hook. The small amount is intentional because $10 doesn't trigger panic. It triggers curiosity and concern. And the message urged him to act quickly to prevent further loss, directing him to contact support immediately. When Edward called the number, a calm, professional voice answered, claiming to represent Microsoft working in coordination with PayPal and local authorities, and the explanation was smooth and rehearsed. Hackers were attempting to access accounts across Adelaide, and Edward's account had been flagged, and that $10 transfer was proof of intrusion. And immediate action was required to stop a larger loss. And nothing about this felt unusual to Edward, because he had dealt with customer service representatives many times before he had resolved legitimate issues through phone calls and screen sharing. And the caller spoke calmly, provided verification codes, and referenced systems Edward recognized. And this is how social engineering works. Trust is not demanded. It is built through familiarity, through competence, through the appearance of authority. And Edward believed the money had already been taken, and that his task was recovery, not realizing that every step he followed was actually enabling the theft. The caller requested remote access to Edward's computer, and Edward complied, because this seemed like standard technical support procedure, and on the screen, numbers changed, balances shifted, and the caller pointed to figures explaining them as evidence of a serious breach. And at one point, the caller highlighted a large amount, calling it an error that needed to be corrected quickly before the bank finalized the loss. And Edward believed he was preventing harm, not causing it. And this psychological manipulation is the cruelest part of these scams, because the victim genuinely believes they are fighting the criminals when they are actually following the criminals' instructions. Over the next 3 days, the situation escalated with repeated calls, constant contact, and firm, clear instructions. And Edward was told exactly what to do and what to say. And he was told delays would make things worse, and the transfers were framed as internal corrections, as temporary movements into safe channels. And he was never told he was sending money to strangers, because in his mind, he was securing his own accounts. The withdrawals were staggering. On the first day, 3 transactions totaling $80,000 then. On the second day, 4 more transactions adding up to $149,900. And by the third day, 4 final transactions completed the theft, bringing the total to $249,000 across 11 separate withdrawals. And as Edward later described it, he was getting into the bank and he was taking money for 4 days. They had carte blanche.
They've got me, they're going to get other people, and if you can make $250,000 in 3 days, you say, this is the best job I've ever had in my life.
But here's what makes this case even more devastating. Edward and Joan used 3 different banks, and 2 of them, National and HSBC, detected the unusual activity, immediately flagged the transactions and shut them down. And as Edward later noted, HSBC bingo, they shut it down immediately, and if we had been with them, there's a good possibility we wouldn't have lost a cent. But Bendigo Bank processed every single transaction without interruption for 4 days, with no alerts issued and no blocks placed, despite the fact that the account had not been actively used in 2 years. The recipients were completely unfamiliar, and the amounts were wildly outside any normal behavior pattern. And this raises serious questions about what banks owe their customers when the warning signs are this obvious. When the truth finally became unavoidable, it arrived without drama. The calls simply stopped. The screens no longer showed recovery steps. And Edward realized there was no reversal coming. The money was gone, and the emotional impact was heavy and quiet. As Edward said, "They've got me. They're going to get other people. And if you can make $250,000 in 3 days, you say this is the best job I've ever had in my life." And there was disbelief and shame and a sense of violation that went beyond words. And when they contacted the bank, the response was procedural. The transactions were classified as authorized because Edward had technically approved them, even though that approval was obtained through manipulation. And the bank stated it had no obligation to monitor or reimburse payments that customers approved even under deception. And the interest charges on the loan account they had accessed remained, and the balance owed actually increased, and the loss was permanent. For Edward and Joan, the money they spent a lifetime saving was gone, and as Joan said, "We have our health, we have each other, we have our family." But Edward also acknowledged there's no way out of it. You've just got to put your nose to the grindstone and get it back there and pay it off. And their routine changed, and their sense of safety changed, and the loss did not end when the transfers stopped. It continued in smaller ways, in hesitation, in doubt, in the quiet realization that decades of careful planning can be undone in days. If you found this investigation valuable, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone who needs to hear it, especially elderly family members, because awareness is the only real protection against these predators. And the next time your phone buzzes with an urgent security alert, remember Edward and Joan and take 1 extra minute to verify through official channels, because that single minute could save everything you've spent your life building. And until next time, stay safe, stay skeptical, and look out for each other.